Hi, Angela Wolf here, and we are starting our tunic top sew-along. So the pieces that you'll need is the front, this piece is cut of interfacing, and your front placket. That's the first step. So on this pattern, you'll see that there's actually a marking. What that is for is interfacing. The fabric, when it's really light like this, I'm just going to flip this over. I like to put a piece of interfacing just to stabilize. Now I cut this a little bit wider so you could see it, but you want it to be basically a 1/2 inch wider than where you're going to be sewing. The other thing I've already finished is top stitching. It's actually stay stitching, a very narrow stitch, 2.0, and I'll swing this back around here. What I did is this is the center of the top, and I'll make a chalk mark with white so you can see it. That's the center of the top. For those of you that might be using a different pattern, I went ahead and gave this chalk mark for you. Thinking ahead, 1 inch on either side of this would be probably a regular tunic pattern, okay? What I did is I added 1 more inch on each side and gave myself a mark here and then angled this line to here. This allowed the top to open just slightly. I kind of like that look. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut down the center just to give myself a guide. Now, you can mark it if you'd like, but I'm just going to eyeball this, and I'm cutting about 1/4 inch away from that stay stitching. And then do this side as well. And then cut across the bottom. And I'm grabbing a different pair of scissors for this. You need a very sharp point. I'm going to trim just to that corner on both sides. Okay? The next thing I'm doing is I'm going to go and press. I'm using steam with the iron, and then I'm going to use a tailor's clapper to help hold this in place. So I'm folding it right along that stitch line. And press with a little bit of steam right to the corner where you clipped. Use the tailor's clapper to hold that in place, and then go all the way around and do the entire neckline. This is going to give you a guide of where to sew that placket. It helps to sew it in straight, and as you'll see, it solves a few problems. There we go. Again, I'm folding on my stay stitching line, which I stitched in a different color so you could see it, but you'd want to use the same color for yours. So this is what I have for my collar. We're ready to sew in the placket, and the last thing you'll need to do is take your pieces for your placket. Now here's a little tip. I cut mine about 2 inches longer than I need. It just makes it easier to insert, and you're not trying to match up your ends so much. You'll see, but I think you might find it to be easy. Just fold that in half, give it a good pressing, and I've already done this to both of my pieces, so I'm gonna go to the sewing machine and sew this in place. To get started, you really don't need pins for this. I'm using a straight stitch, about a 2.5 stitch length, and I prefer my needle to be in the center position. So let's take a look at the top so you know where I'm going here. I'm going to start on this side. I'm going to pull this out like this. Here is my placket. This is the raw edge. This is the finished edge. I press those together real good. And I'm just going to line this up. I have much more at the top and bottom than I need, but just take this, fold it, so to the wrong side, I can line this up, just like that. And I'm going to stitch right on the marks that I already have on here. If you notice, I'm going to start right at the corner of that point that we cut. Oops. Love it when the machine tells you to put your presser foot down. Back stitch a little bit. Again, you're right at that back corner, and stitch. And I'm stitching right along my pressed line this time, because just in case your stitch line wasn't straight, your press line will be. So that's one side. And now this other side here, I can just take, this is the raw edge to the raw edge. I'm going to flip this around so you can see that, so you're following. This is just the other side. Again, leaving plenty at the top, because I'm going to cut that off later. I'm lining up the raw edge to the raw edge on the placket. Let's stitch all the way down. If you've ever put in a welt pocket, this is the exact same technique. I'm stitching all the way down to the corner, And so far, this is what I have. Pretty nice. Now I would go and press this, but I'm just gonna keep sewing so you can follow along. So, this top was actually designed to be on an angle. Now if yours is straight up and down, I'm gonna do that later on a different episode for buttons, but this is the part that you need to make sure stays straight. It's right here. I'm just gonna pin this in place to give me a guide when I turn it upside down. So there we go, flip your top. I'm trying to flip it slow so you could watch follow what's happening here. So that was the inside. These are my leftover plackets that I'm gonna be cutting off. Let's go back to the machine. Now I know there's a pin in there, so be very careful. The first thing I'm gonna do is just line up the edge of my foot. It's not gonna hit that pin, so no worries there. I'm gonna put my needle in the left position, and all I'm doing is stitching on the edge here, away from that pin, just keeping those plackets in place. So this I can just cut, get rid of that extra. Now, what about that pin? The next thing I wanna do is I'm holding my hand to the back and removing that pin. Because I did that little stay stitching, it kept everything in place. So here is the trick. When you stitch this one, put it back to the center position here. You're starting in the corner, but instead of stitching straight across, you're going to angle in and back out. And that is the part that makes your placket look more professional. In and then back out, ending right at that corner. And I'll bring you back up here and show you what this looks like. I think it'll be easier to see. So you can kind of see how that's curved, but really from the right side of the garment, you can't tell that. It's only a little tip to help keep your placket nice and flat. So I'm gonna just give this a little pressing. Depending on your fabric, you might wanna use a press cloth so you don't end up with iron marks. The next thing I would do is go around and top stitch this, but let me show you it from the back and then I'll pull out one that's finished. So this is the back side. You're gonna trim off that extra. Again, it's kind of a little bit hard to see with the white on white, but it curves just a little bit. So let me grab this one. I've already finished this piece, just so you can see, because you have one more step here. I went through here and I top stitched all the way around, just right on the edge. It keeps it in place. Right before I did that, I went through and serged all the edges. So this is what the wrong side looks like, just like this. And the last step is to fold these together to make sure that they match. And we're going to cut a curve, which you'll see on the neckline, and you'll use your pattern as a guide. But basically, this is gonna go just like this. And do that to both pieces. A little curve like this, and you're all set. So in the next episode, we're gonna gather the shoulders and sew in our collar.